Welcome to Library in Your Living Room. Happy Earth Day. Today we're glad to have Marissa Hopkins with us doing a presentation. She's an avid kitchen gardener, a lifelong North Shore resident and a Highland Park resident, and she's going to explain the ins and outs of spring vegetable gardening. To contact Marissa afterward with questions, she'll probably put it up, but her email is marissa@marissahopkins.com. And then you can see all of the library's virtual programs on our homepage, hplibrary.org. So enjoy the presentation. Thanks, Marissa.
You are welcome. Thank you. I'm just trying to make sure that we haven't jumped too far ahead in my slides, but I guess we'll find out in a moment. First of all, what I want to tell you is thank you. Thank you to the library and thank you to Go Green for sponsors. If everyone can mute themselves, that would be awesome. If you know how to do that. Okay, perfect. So that you'll be able to hear me better without ambient noise. So again, thank you. Today we are going to talk about spring gardening, and first I want to explain to you how I got involved in this and why I do this now as a real estate agent. I don't really do it as a real estate agent, but I do consider it part of my passion, which is about loving life at home. So here you can see there are many ways to love life at home, and one, of course, is to garden. Today, given our unique situation, staying safe at home, this is a fun activity as well to do to stay safe at home. So as a non-real estate agent, a human being, I actually want to give you a little background on how I started gardening. I began at age 8. I wouldn't say much to my mom's chagrin, but I did it on my own initiative. I decided to dig up the backyard one afternoon and did so. Then told my mother, and they actually kept the garden long after I left. So she wasn't too upset about it, but I literally pulled up all the sod with my hands. When I was in college, I had a plot at what we had was the organic farm on our campus. So I continued gardening there, growing vegetables. And then in Evanston, they had public lots like they actually do in Highland Park, although I don't think they're open right now. So I had one there, which was a little disappointing because it was right on the lake, which that prevents plants from growing as quickly as you'd like, or hot weather crops. And then in the city of Chicago is when I began growing vegetables in pots, because I didn't have any other place to grow them in the earth. We were in a small lot, as most people are in the city, but I did have a porch, an open porch. So I was able to grow in pots. And then now that brings us to today, where you can see here, we're pretty avid kitchen gardeners now. You can see our garden down here. This is my herb garden. This is my butterfly garden to attract pollinators, and all of this and well beyond throughout the yard are all vegetables. So the most important takeaway from this is I am not a professional gardener by any stretch of the imagination, but I've been doing it pretty much my whole life, and mostly grow vegetables and flowers. So today is Earth Day. And I just wanted to say a couple things about Earth Day and then what my promises are for today. First of all, I think a number of us are of the right age to know that Earth Day began 50 years ago. What you may or may not know is it actually came out of the time, which was when in the 50s and 60s, it was a time of great prosperity and growth and pollution. The air wasn't so breathable, the water was getting miserable, there were oil spills, there were all sorts of things. In 1962, Rachel Carlson wrote a book called Silent Spring. It was a bestseller. And it was basically on her concern for the environment, linking pollution and public health together, really for the first time. In '69, a senator from Wisconsin named Gaylord Nelson is attributed with being the founder of Earth Day. And he was again responding to a massive oil spill and decided to try and leverage the energy of the hippie time, if you will, where all the colleges were having protests, and decided to launch. It wasn't called Earth Day. It was going to be a teach-in, and they chose April 22nd because it was the weekday between spring break and final exams, and this was going to be launched on campuses. Well, they employed a person named Dennis Hayes to help organize, and he decided this was a national concern, and it exploded. So by April 22nd of 1970, over 20 million people were participating in the first Earth Day, and he named it Earth Day. So there you are, here we are today, and what that actually led to in the same year was the creation of the US EPA. All right, so here we have, what is it that the EPA, actually this is part of a symbol for the EPA. Someone needs to mute who has a dog. We have reduce, reuse, recycle, restore, and replenish. And we're going to cover all 5 of those R's when we talk about vegetable gardening in your backyard. And I promise that within the next 30 minutes that you will know how to anywhere and be successful at growing your own spring vegetable garden. All right, that's my promise. So why have a spring vegetable garden? There are many reasons, as you can see on my screen. There's a huge variety of choices of different types of vegetables you will never see in a grocery store to choose from in a lot of the seed catalogs. So you can have all sorts of exotic and different and a huge variety of vegetables to choose from. That's true with any vegetables, but also with spring, various lettuces and such. It's great for kids. It's very rewarding. Of course, of importance today is that you can do it at home. It's good for the earth. One of the reasons I want to point out, which is about reducing, is there's no shipping, no fossil fuel used to transport your vegetables from the farm to the grocery store or the broker, then the grocery store to you. There's no packaging, so no plastic bags, and we all know those are a problem right now. Only your hands have touched it, which is a plus with COVID, and it builds humility and appreciation, and I want to touch on that one specifically. And that is appreciation. Once you start growing your own vegetables, you may discover that some things work and some things don't. That can be a matter of many things, but one is, of course, nature. Mother Nature, and you can have too much rain like we did last year, too much cold like we did last year, and different vegetables will flourish, be it cold, hot, wet, dry, but inevitably some will flourish and some won't. And that's a matter of, like I said, a lot of it's the environment as well as making sure you plant correctly. Appreciation, you know, we go to the grocery store, but we don't necessarily think about the people who brought us our food. So we learn through gardening where our vegetables actually come from and that it takes time and effort. So for me, those are very important things. So here, this is important to make spring gardening a distinction from other gardening, and that is for everything there is a season, and I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with that from Ecclesiastes, a time to plant. And that is true with different vegetables as well. Spring vegetables are cold-loving vegetables, and they are not hot crops. Hot crops you always plant after Memorial Day up here in Chicago, and that's because they require warm soil and warm nights, which we don't have right now. There's also fall planting, one of which those items is garlic, and those you actually plant in the fall for harvest the next year. So what is spring gardening? Spring gardening is the planting of the vegetables that are cold tolerant. And there are certain vegetables, most of these, you can only plant when it's cold. Otherwise, they just either won't sprout, or they'll taste horrible. You can start spring gardening as soon as the soil is soft, which it certainly is now. We planted mid-March, beginning of March, outside, and we have things growing, but it's not too late, since many of these vegetables only take 25 to 40 days at the most to be harvestable. Again, it's the only time, and these are also, a lot of these are called catch crops, which means they're fast growing and they're often fillers between main crops, and I'll be talking a little bit about that as we go on. All right, why is spring such a great time, especially if you're a first-time gardener? And that's because it's easy. Mother Nature does a lot of the work. We actually have a lot of sun now, more so than we will in fall. And because the leaves on the trees haven't come out yet, our gardens and our pots get a lot more sun than they will as summer progresses. And again, these particular spring plants are frost tolerant, and ours survive the snow as well. So this is the time. One distinction I want to make is annuals versus perennials, which is an important thing to know about fruits and vegetables. We're going to be talking about annuals today, and those are the plants you have to replant every year. They start with a seed, they grow into a plant, and then they end with a seed and die. And it's all in one season, one life cycle, and that's most vegetables. There are also perennials, which you might be familiar with from flowers or other plants, but there are also vegetable perennials like asparagus. Obviously, strawberries and raspberries are fruit, but those are also perennials. And you might notice here that they don't produce in their first year. They actually take a year or two to produce. But you don't have to keep replanting them either. These are examples of some cold tolerant vegetables, from arugula, the lettuces, bok choy, radishes, snap peas, spinach. These are all the things you can plant now for your spring garden. And then the question is where to plant. In spring gardening, basically there's anywhere that's sun, ideally 6 hours a day. Preferably south facing, because that's where they'll get the strongest sun. You need access to water, but you can also plant not only in the earth, but also on a balcony, patio, wherever you can put a pot. And I also wanted to point out, since we're urban gardeners, you can even garden in spaces like between your driveways, which is where we actually started here, because that's where our sun was before we created our kitchen garden. So actually here, I don't know if you can see it, but that's our garlic coming up this year. All right, so can you plant in the ground? Of course you can. It's a little more challenging in that you've got bunnies and chipmunks to contend with. If it's near your house, I don't strongly encourage it unless you test your soil if you live in an older house, because you can have lead paint that's chipped over the years. Since 1978, we haven't had lead paint, but if your house is older than that, then chances are you do have some lead in your soil. And then you still have to prepare your soil, which I'll be talking about later. All right, so I'm a proponent of containers, especially if you're just starting out, and it's the easiest way to start. You can pretty much do it anywhere, and you know the soil is safe, presumably because you've purchased it. You are away from the critters. You can move the pots where you want them, as long as they're not huge like the ones you see in front of you. And reuse, that's one of our R's, is that you can reuse your pots over and over. Our first set of pots in the city, we Okay, truth. We actually took off the parkway because people were disposing of them, and I found many pots during Big Garbage Day that way. And you can use other things, which you'll see as well. All right, the right container for every plant. The bigger the plant, the bigger the container you're going to need. You want to make sure it is size right. You can also get miniature plants. They're called dwarfs, so you might want to look for that. But if the pot's too small, the plant may not grow to its full potential and it may not fruit. So you want to make sure that you're matching your pot to your plant. The other issue is smaller pots need more frequent watering. You can't tell. This pot's actually considerably smaller than the pot in the back, but the perspective got messed up in my photograph. So shallow pots, you can use actually a flower box if you happen to have one on your house, and you can't really put flowers in it right now, but you could plant lettuce and you could have a delicious salad in a few weeks. Arugula, another one. So, you know, they need like a 5-inch deep pot, which is nothing. Or like I said, a garden box. Tomatoes do need a deep pot, and tomatoes are not a spring crop, but you'll understand why I'm bringing that up in a moment. And then root vegetables actually do need deep pots that are at least 10 inches to 12 inches deep if they're going to do well. All right, so the benefit of deep pots. Remember I said that a lot of our spring vegetables are catch crops, radishes, lettuce, etc. They're the ones you can use in the gap. Well, that's true for tomatoes as well, because often what we do is in our very large pots, and I'm going to show you one here right now, assuming you can see me. You can get a sense of how big these really are. This is a big pot. This is 22 inches in diameter, and it's 16 inches deep. We plant our tomatoes in that. They're nice and heavy. The pots won't blow over, but we don't plant tomatoes now. So in the periphery, we put our catch crops, our lettuce, our radishes, and you'll see in a moment what that might look like in a pot. So, so again, the benefit of a deep pot is you can put a hot crop in the middle eventually, but first use it for your spring vegetables. You also need deep and big pots for your root vegetables, and the other benefit to big pots is you don't have to water as often, and vegetables do need water. All right, so container options. You basically have two choices. One is you either have to have drainage, meaning holes in your pots, or you need a self-watering pot. And of course, it needs to be the right size for the vegetable. But it doesn't have to be something you pick up at Costco like I did. Those are $19 a piece now. When I first started buying them, they were $15 just a couple years ago. And but you could use something found as well. I tend to use the found pots in my herb garden, but you could, there's certainly a 5-gallon bucket or a milk jug you can cut off, you can grow things in. So buying pots shouldn't limit you, or of course finding pots, from starting a spring garden. Plastic versus ceramic. Plastic is lighter and easier to move. It also retains water better. But clay pots, if you have heat-loving vegetables, if you move on to that, like peppers, they love, love, love clay pots because they hold the heat. All right, so setting up. The pots I have pretty much all have holes on the bottom, and the reason I like that is these pots actually don't come with holes, but the reason I want them to have holes is if it rains heavily, you could be accumulating a lot of water, which could give your plants root rot. So you don't want that. So I prefer to have holes in the bottom of the pot, and then I put some sort of aggregate on the bottom, such as big rocks or broken clay pots. And you can also actually put styrofoam on the bottom of your pots, that packing material. But first check to make sure that it's not water soluble, because a lot of the packing material nowadays is water soluble, so it'll just dissolve, and it's actually made out of cornstarch, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So you'll want to test it first. But if you use styrofoam, you may want to put something over it to keep its shape. Then in terms of the soil you use, a prepackaged container mix is the easiest thing to do, and you know it's going to work well, but make sure it's a potting mix and not topsoil or something like that, because topsoil is just way too dense for using in a pot, because as you can see here, if you're going to make your own, you need to have only a third of topsoil, maybe even a quarter. A third roughly of peat moss, and then a third to as much as a half of compost. So you'll want to mix those items together, and then you can also add fertilizer if you so choose. So now you have your pots ready. You have a pot, you have the drainage, or it's a self-watering pot. And a self-watering pot, by the way, is a pot that you buy that says it's self-watering, because it has a area on the bottom of the pot that'll hold water longer, so you don't have to water them as frequently. So you have your pots, you have your drainage, you have your soil, you're ready to go. Now you want to plant. Again, we're looking for cold tolerant vegetables, so make sure that's what you're growing. And then you will see on the back of a seed packet what the actual directions are. So days to harvest, depth to plant the seeds, which can be anywhere from literally laying them on top of the soil to about a ½ inch in general. Ultimately, after the seedlings start to grow, you'll then need to thin them, which means put more distance between each plant. And it will tell you, or could tell you, they may or may not have all this information, when you should expect to see seedlings. And then again, when to plant. And obviously you're going to look for Illinois if it doesn't already say so. Okay, so let's talk about reuse. Obviously, many of us who've tried planting seeds before know that you have to get more seeds than you need. So can you reuse them a year later or two? And the answer is possibly. We've reused seeds a lot. First of all, with new seeds, theoretically, they should be viable. They should sprout. But we've had seeds that never sprouted, that were brand new. It's nature. It's, you know, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes if you plant too soon or too late, again, they won't grow. So just because they're new seeds isn't a guarantee they're going to work, but chances are they will. But in previous years, if you want to, before you spend a whole lot of time waiting for the seedlings to grow, you can do a test. And I'm showing you what a test looks like here. It's a paper towel folded in a quarter, moistened. You put your seeds in it. I actually use, this is a carry-out container from a restaurant, so that's reuse. And you just literally lay the paper towels inside. I always label, as you can see here, what the plant is. And then you can test to make sure the seeds are viable, because here you can see it's actually growing a root, or here it's growing a root, and you can see, okay, these seeds work. You can actually plant those too. All right. Those happen to be milkweed, which is probably the hardest plant that I've found to grow. And I'm working on it. We'll see how it goes this year. All right, so how to plant. Follow directions on the package, obviously, in terms of depth and distance. I make a trough with my finger, so I will literally make a circle in the case of a circle pot. Not all pots are circular, and that's fine. And then carefully place the seeds in the distance they say. Now, I tend to not use as many seeds as they recommend because I'm thrifty and I want to maximize my seeds. So I'm willing to move plants while they're still young, which I'll show you in a moment. And of course, when you're planting, you want to be careful if it's windy outside, because the seeds can blow away and your packet can blow away and dump, and you don't want either of those things to happen. So my point here is that if more often than not, when your seeds start to grow, your little seedlings, it's going to look like this. It's not going to look like this, all neat and organized. And so the reason I don't plant as many seeds is I don't want to waste as many plants. So when they're two to four leaves, I will carefully dig those out and separate them and then replant so that there's enough space between, and that's called thinning. Or I put them in another pot, the ones that I don't need. Thinning also can be just literally pulling out the seed or snipping the top off so it won't thrive. And the point in doing it, and it is important to thin to the recommended distances so that your vegetables grow to their full capacity. If you don't thin lettuce and you don't want to harvest it as, small leaves, if you want a big full head, which you can grow, you want to make sure and thin your seeds. All right, so again, you can see here where we have many little ones, but then we thin them down so that they can have the chance to grow. Here's kale. This looks like bok choy. And you will need to fertilize a couple times. For green leafy plants, I recommend fish emulsion, which really stinks. If you bought potting soil with fertilizer already in it, you don't need to do this. All right. The other element you need is flowers, ideally. And the reason you need flowers are twofold. One is to attract pollinators to your garden. You need the bees, you need the butterflies, you need the hummingbirds to fertilize basically the flowers so you'll get a fruit or eventually a seed. Without pollinators, there are no fruits and vegetables. So not only are they important for our garden, they're important for farmers, they're important for everyone around us. So pollinators are very, very important. And the other thing is to not use pesticides because that kills pollinators. So you want to attract butterflies to your garden so that you will have the fruits. And also I want to make a note right now, which is to plant dill and parsley now. Those are both cold weather plants, and swallowtails need those. That's where they lay their eggs, and that's the only thing their caterpillars eat, and fennel. But if you plant dill seeds now and parsley now, the swallowtails will appreciate it, and I have free dill seeds for you if you want them. All right, harvesting tips. For at least all our green leafy vegetables, even beets, you want to harvest before there's signs of bolting. So what is bolting? You have a plant, you have a nice beautiful head of lettuce, and then all of a sudden in the middle you start seeing this stem start to grow, and it has the flower head on it. That's bolting. It can happen in one day. If you see it early in the morning and it's a hot day, it can literally bolt, and then you have to harvest it right away. You can either try cutting off the flower piece. Now, when it's this long, it's too late. You just have to, sorry, how did that happen? Drats. I'm not going to be able to go back. I apologize. I'm not sure how to go back. Oh, there it is. I did it. Yay. Okay. So anyway, you want to harvest if you see your plants bolting. And with lettuce, I recommend taking off the whole head. Now, little leaves will start to grow. They're not going to be good. I tend to pull the whole thing after I've cut the head off because it's one of those plants that you don't want to have keep going. It just won't taste good. The other thing about hot weather and lettuce is your lettuce will get bitter. So you do want to harvest it earlier than later. But I harvest it as I need it. You can go a couple weeks as long as it's not super hot out. and let the plants keep growing, and you take a head a night, and it's fantastic. All right, arugula, I always harvest it small. So this is just in a couple weeks because I don't like big arugula. It's bitter. So you can just keep planting seeds progressively and keep arugula going for a long time, spring and fall. With beets, not only can you eat the beet itself, but you can eat the greens after you've pulled them, and they make delicious salads, so keep that in mind. Root vegetables, you can harvest as you need them, but you don't want to wait too long. But you can leave them again for a few weeks because otherwise you're going to get inundated with vegetables, you'll find. Or you can give them away, which is great. With herbs and kale and chard, those are, many of them are spring vegetables, but you can keep chard and kale going all the way through to the fall. And kale will even take it frozen. Kale and Brussels sprouts. So even though we're starting it now in the spring, if you harvest from the bottom up, you take the bottommost leaves and you'll see they sort of grow in a spiral. It'll just keep growing taller and taller and keep growing more leaves. So those are great plants if you like chard and kale. And they're super nutritious. Chives grow all season. They'll have beautiful flowers for the butterflies here soon, and they'll come back next year.